Welcome to this webinar hosted by VCRS and EC Innovations. We will talk about how to master both marketing authorization and joint clinical assessment successfully. As you know that the European Union is transforming reimbursement process with the introduction of the JCA, Joint Clinical Assessment, under the new HTA regulation. So this major change aims to streamline clinical evaluations across all member states, harmonizing the process and improving market access for innovative therapies. And this will be mandatory for all new oncology products and advanced therapies. We call it ATMPs, for which a marketing authorization application is submitted to the EMA from January 12th next year. Because the JCA and the marketing authorization process will be conducted in parallel, the companies, biotech, pharma, must be well prepared for the JCA to avoid any launch delays. So today we are really happy to have two experts with us, Gabrielle and Decibel. You will see that Gabrielle is specialized in market access and Decibel is an expert in regulatory. It's really a good combination to address today's topic. So Decibel is a highly experienced regulatory science professional with more than 25 years in the field of health products development in both pharma, biotech, and consulting firms. His expertise really lies in all regulatory activities on both the strategic part and the operational levels. He has been involved in pre-registration, launch, and lifecycle management activities in the field of drug development, with interactions with the FDA's EMA and other national agencies. Gabrielle, as I mentioned before, is a market access expert. She has over 25 years experience in a variety of global market access positions in both pharma and biotech companies. She has hands-on experience in developing and leading pricing and reimbursement strategies and has worked across a wide range of health tech product, including orphan drugs, advanced therapies, and repurposed drugs. So before we dive into the topic, I would like to give the floor to our partner, EC Innovations, to give a brief introduction of the company. I hand over to Luna.
Okay, thank you, Zhenxi. Hello, everyone. I'm Luna from EC Innovations, and it is great to be here with you today. We're a global top 50 language service provider with over 20 years of experience supporting the life sciences industry. We're excited to co-host this webinar with our dear partner, VCLS. So before it begins, I'd like to briefly talk about how language solutions can make a real difference in achieving regulatory success. At ECI, we get the challenges that RA and legal professionals face, especially when it comes to keeping documentation accurate, timely, and compliant across different regions. We offer customized language services that cover everything from clinical trial documents and regulatory submissions to scientific publications and patent applications. We know the regulatory landscape is constantly evolving, especially with initiatives like the Joint Clinical Assessment in the EU. It is a lot to keep up with, but our flexible approach allows us to adapt to your specific needs while maintaining the highest standards for quality and confidentiality. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion on tackling both marketing authorization and clinical assessment challenges together. If you'd like to know more about how ECI can support your needs, please feel free to reach out after the webinar. Now I pass the mic to Zhenxi.
Thank you, Luna, for the brief introduction. For those who are not really familiar with our webinar format, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will last approximately 1 hour, but we will leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So during the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to send us through the Zoom platform. And also, the webinar replay will be available on the website of Watson Consulting Life Sciences. We will send you a link once the replay is available on the site. It's on-demand replay. All right, so to give you the context, we will first talk about the current EU MAA process and the reimbursement process as an introduction. Then we will address what does the new HTA regulation talk about, so which health tech or which healthcare technologies are in the scope of the HTA regulation and which are not. We will then dive into the JCA, the scope of the assessment, PICO, that's population, intervention, comparators, and outcomes. We will also talk about the timeline with examples and case studies. So then we will wrap up with a conclusion. So before we go to the first part, introduction, I would like to ask the audience one poll question. Are you really familiar with preparing and submitting marketing authorization application in Europe? Given that we have a lot of people join the session today, maybe the knowledge of each one to MA is not the same. So we would like to know a little bit about your knowledge on doing MAA in Europe. Whether it's new to you, whether you have done it before, or maybe you heard of it but haven't really exercised it. So I shared the result. You can see that almost it's average the responses to each option. New to you, you have heard of it but never done it before. I do hope that this webinar will help you to understand better the MAA, and especially under the new JCA process. Thank you for answering that. Share the results. Okay, stop sharing. Now I pass it to Decibel for the introduction. Over to you, Decibel.
Yes, thank you so much, Zenchi, and thanks for everyone for having made this opportunity to come. That is to say, the setup of the webinar, as well as all the participants who have joined. As I can see, there's a balanced approach when it comes to understanding or not the European landscape. So probably for the next slide, we go on to identifying the right avenue to reach the market in Europe. As you can see, there are different avenues, and the one of most interest for us today is the one that is connected with the JCA, the Joint Clinical Assessment, and this covers the centralized procedure. We will not be discussing today aspects such as the mutual recognition, decentralized procedure, national authorization. Just also to clarify some elements, the focus of today will be mostly focusing on drugs, medicinal products in the context of the JCA. We can, of course, and will address questions related to the devices and diagnostics, but for the moment, the main body of the presentation will be focusing on the medicinal products which are subject to the JCA. And before dwelling into the specifics of this new process, probably we need to frame a bit the picture of the centralized procedure, which is the avenue to gain market access and marketing authorization into Europe. So this is a centralized procedure, is a regulatory vehicle in a framework that is imposed for marketing authorization applicants for products such as human medicines containing new active substances addressing diseases of major interest, or who have a pan-European public health issue aspect to address. This covers orphan diseases, HIV, cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, viral diseases. This can be or not coupled with a technology at work, that is to say, innovative technologies, meaning all biotech products, all ATMP medicinal products and monoclonal antibodies. You may, as an applicant, also choose to go for centralized procedure in cases where you have other innovative products, such as new active substance for indications other than the ones that are stated above. That is to say, oncology, HIV, and so forth, which are identified clearly by the authorities, or who have a significant therapeutic or scientific or technical innovation in mind. And lastly, but not least, those authorization who would be of interest, again, for public or animal health at EU level. That is to say, other diseases than the one mentioned earlier. All this information can be easily found and identified on the European Medicines Agency's website. But for the purpose of this discussion, it's super important that we focus on the centralized procedure aspects. As an outcome of this centralized procedure, the marketing authorization is valid throughout the 27 EU member states and associated countries. It offers the benefit of a centralized safety monitoring and a unique product information in all EU member states at the same time. That is to say, one invented name, identical product information in all EU languages, and covering EPAR, SMPC, patient leaflet, and labeling. So this centralized procedure process, as of now, and until now, was kind of independent from health technology assessment bodies' assessments, in a sense that the EMA focuses mostly in terms of a recommendation for marketing authorization, and then the price and reimbursement in a sequential mode is handled at national level when it comes to demonstrating the value for the money. This is not part of the marketing authorization application. What happens in the next slide is a focus on this centralized procedure process. This European centralized procedure process lasts for about 300 days between the beginning, day one start, and until the European Commission issuing and publishing the positive outcome into the decision for granting the marketing authorization at the European Journal. During this period, there are around 210 active days of evaluation. That is to say, no additional data or interactions happen. And actually what happens is that there are moments during which there is quality, safety, and efficacy discussions and elements can happen between the applicant and the regulator in so-called question and answer rounds, which are typically in a number of two. There's a first window of opportunity to interact between day 120 and day 121, which is a formal up to 3 months clock stop, during which the marketing authorization applicant has time to elaborate on the answers to address all the questions that are raised by the reviewer. And there's an optional second window during this period that will last much less, more or less 1 month to the maximum, between day 180 and 181. Fundamentally, for the purpose of the discussion of today, the major focus is to be taken into account for the first clock stop at day 120 up until day 121. The kind of aspects that have to be addressed during this period will be devised by my colleague Gabrielle in regards to the price and reimbursement and JCA process in order to reach the final conclusions of the evaluation. And I leave the floor to my colleague Gabrielle for the next slide onwards.
And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So in Europe, you may know that marketing authorization is not enough to make the health technology available for patients. The generated evidence must satisfy both regulator and payers because you will need positive HTA recommendations to reach patients. And to illustrate this, let's go back to the first ATMPs, And you see 6 of them were withdrawn from the market following negative HTA appraisals. So without a positive health technology appraisal, there will be no reimbursements. And the developed evidence must satisfy both regulators and payers. Okay, once you get marketing authorization, you need to pass local HTA evaluations for your health technology to be funded. A successful HTA appraisal is needed to reach the market with good pricing and reimbursement conditions. National HTA bodies have been carrying out both assessment and appraisal. In the assessment phase, the assessors review the evidence. In the appraisal phase, they determine the health technology's added value for the patients and for the healthcare system. Next slide. For drug assessed through the JCA, national HTA bodies will use the Joint Clinical Assessment Report to make their appraisal. Let's go. Let's talk about the HTA regulation. So at the origin, there was the European Network for Health Technology Assessments, next slide please, a consortium called EUNETA, which was a voluntary cross-border initiative on HTA harmonization established and funded by the European Commission. Since its inception in 2005, the collaboration completed 23 non-mandatory joint assessments, which were called relative effectiveness assessments, and 38 scientific advices in collaboration with the EMEA. So the European HTA regulation established a formal continuation of the EUNETA. This regulation, EU 2021-2282, on health technology assessment, also called HTAR, aims at improving the availability of innovative health technologies for European patients. It ensures an efficient use of resources and strengthens the quality of HTA across the Union. The HTA regulation will also reduce duplication of efforts for national HTA authorities and industry, facilitate business predictability, and ensure the long-term sustainability of EU HTA cooperation. Let's go to the next slide. So this regulation comprises 4 main areas of work, of which 2 very important ones. The joint scientific consultations, which are scientific advice with both EMA and HTA bodies, and joint clinical assessments. So here you have one thing is that the word joint does not cover the same. In joint scientific consultation, both EMA and HTA bodies are on board, while the joint clinical assessment is HTA bodies business only, even if there will be exchanges of information and eventually discussion between EMA and the HTA coordination group. So all activities, joint scientific consultation, joint clinical assessment, horizon scanning, and procedures are overseen by this HTA coordination group, which is composed of all EU member states and will function by consensus. So the HTA regulation entered into force in January 2022, and it will be applicable from the 12th of January next year. The European Commission has been endorsing, by means of implementing acts, the methodology and a common procedural framework for joint clinical assessments and joint scientific consultations. So far, 1 single implementing act has been endorsed, and some of us are wondering whether the rules will be ready for the game to start on time. So I was telling you, in Europe, once you get a marketing authorization or CE marking, you need your health technology to be reimbursed to reach the market. National HTA bodies have been carrying out both assessment and appraisal. And from 2025 onward, national HTA bodies will use the joint clinical assessment report to make their appraisal. Indeed, member states remain responsible for drawing conclusions on added value for the healthcare system and taking decision on pricing and reimbursements.
So here comes the regulatory guy again. Before we embark into the mechanism related to the JCA, we need to identify which healthcare technologies are in the scope of the regulation. And on the next slide, you can see a very high-level summary on the articles referred to in the regulation, which identify the different products which are under the scope of the regulation. So these are related to medicinal products, meaning new active substance, devices and diagnostics, which are subject of the joint clinical assessment in a phasing frame between January 2025 until 2030. On this slide, you can see that it's a phased approach that will end up in 2030. So beginning of January 2025, cancer medicines or medicines addressing cancer or condition and ATMPs will be subject to the ATMP, will be subject to the JCA, as well as certain classes of devices and in vitro diagnostics. By 2028, orphan medicines will be also subject into the JCA, and by 2030 in January, all drugs, all devices, and in vitro diagnostics will be subject to the JCA. There's something that at a European level needs to be borne in mind, that there are exceptions. It can be decided by the Commission that earlier JCA can be applied for products which have the potential to address unmet medical need or to address a public health emergency or has significant impact on healthcare systems from the medico-economic perspective. Just to note as well that biosimilars, generics, and hybrids are not in the scope of this regulation. The next slides will identify further down the definitions, but don't be afraid of these definitions. These definitions are well known to drug developers throughout the different areas of interest. That's a medicinal product, new active substance, advanced therapy medicinal products, and orphan medicinal products are clearly highlighted and identified, and you want to cross-refer to that without going into the in-depth reading aspects. We can just confirm that it's part of the directives as well as the specific regulations of the different items and definitions that are highlighted on this slide. Probably next slide is the definition of cancer, which is also well known to the public and especially the developers, in the sense that the cancer is relating to the WHO ICD oncology definition, stating that cancer is all malignant and borderline malignant neoplasms, and includes primary or secondary neoplasms carcinoma, which are carcinoma in situ, and neoplasm classified as uncertain whether benign or malignant. When it comes to the treatment of cancer, if you have a direct or direct anti-tumor effect, then you are an anti-cancer drug. If there is an additional effect as well on top, then you're still an anti-cancer drug. Unfortunately, you are not seen as an anti-cancer product if there is no direct anti-tumor or curative effect on the cancer. And we can spend time into devising these aspects, but probably not part of the current presentation and webinar. And then now I can leave the floor happily to Gabrielle, now that we have defined the different topics.
Yeah, Gabrielle, you addressed how we are going to prepare the dossier of JCA, or the scoping process, and especially the PICOs. I would like to do a second poll question to the audience. Whether you have a plan to submit an MAA in Europe, maybe you plan to do it in the next 12 months, 2 years, or you don't have such a plan at the moment, or probably you are planning it, but you are not quite sure about the timeline. We all know that submitting and preparing an MAA is quite long, it's quite time consuming, it requires resources. So it will be interesting for us to learn your thoughts about it. I will share the result. Yes, okay. It's within our expectation. Probably most of you don't have such a plan at the moment. You would like to know more about how to prepare it. So we do hope that this webinar will help you to understand the new process, I mean, the updated process, how to work with the GCA for your MA submission. And now I hand over the floor to Gabrielle.
Yes, about the JCA dossier and the scoping process and the nice PICOs. So next slide. The first thing is that you have to keep in mind that the European Joint Clinical Assessment will only address clinical domains, because non-clinical domains, ethical, organizational, legal, social aspects, the economic evaluation, these domains are more context specific, and so they will be addressed by local HTA bodies. Next slide. So the scoping process will identify the relevant PICOs for the assessments. The overall assessment scope for the joint clinical assessment shall be inclusive and reflect all member states' needs. So that means that the assessment should cover the PICOs requested by the 27 member states. And you know that the standard of care often varies across European countries. All authorized medicines are unfortunately not available in every market. The reimbursement of a medicine might be as per label in one country, but restricted to a patient subgroup in another one. So the PICOs are defined during the scoping process, which is initiated by the JCA Secretariat. And then a PICO survey is conducted among member states who provide information about their needs in terms of PICO parameters, population, comparators, outcomes. The PICO framework provides a standard format for specifying research questions, detailing the following parameters: population or subpopulation, in which intervention under assessment should be used, intervention, which could be therapeutic, diagnostic, or preventive, comparators, the alternative intervention against which the intervention under assessment should be compared to, and the outcome of interest, efficacy, and safety measurements. So once the scope is defined, the submitted dossier must report relative effectiveness and relative safety for all populations and comparators defined in the scoping process. At the moment, we do not know whether the number of PICOs will be capped. Next slide. So this illustrative table summarizes member states' requirements in terms of population and comparators. From these requirements, we can estimate the number of PICOs in scope. Let's first look at the three green columns on the left, which indicate appropriate comparators for a population according to the license indication, so full license indication. Here, we will end up with 2 PICOs to cover the need for member state 4 with comparator 3 and comparator 4, 1 PICO that covers the need for member state 1, given that member state 1 and member state 2 have no preference for their listed comparator. So the company can decide which of those 2 common comparators will be included in the submission. So in total, the full licensed population requires 3 PICOs. Then for subpopulation A, the company can perform a single PICO with comparator 1 only. And for subpopulation B, 2 PICOs, but the HTD can perform a single PICO with comparator 3 only. The scoping process has to be completed before CHMP opinion. This means that the anticipated population might change after the PICOs have been postulated because of the regulatory process. If the CHMP recommends a different indication from the one initially applied for, an update of the PICO is expected and the evaluation process will be delayed. The next slide. So in the submitted dossier, all PICOs relevant for a single population will be clustered into one chapter. In case of our example, this would result in 3 chapters. Chapter 1, full license indication, Chapter 2, subpopulation A, and Chapter 3, subpopulation B. Each relevant comparator is then assessed sequentially. If randomized control trials are the gold standard, head-to-head comparison might not be available. So for most of, if not all PICOs, you will need to first conduct a systematic literature review, second, assess the feasibility of an indirect treatment comparison, and third, if possible, provide the rationale for the selected statistical method and report the indirect treatment comparison analysis. Let's go to next slide. Okay, as part of their preparation for the JCA, Roche recently conducted a PICO pilot project on a breast cancer using the UNETA scoping process guidelines. This pilot work revealed the risk of an exponentially high number of PICOs and highlighted the need for transparency and objective criteria for the consolidation of PICOs. Their pilot initially resulted in 51 PICOs. After some consolidation, this figure was revised down to 26. That remains nevertheless very important. The large number of PICOs was driven by the definition of the populations. You could have, for example, endocrine status, ESR mutation status, gender, and also the choice of relevant comparators, because there is a variety of products that could be considered as standard of care, even within one country. You may have 2 classes of drugs, several products in each class, and then you have also the possibility of using these therapies in combination and in several different sequences. Next slide. So let's talk about timelines and the JCA preparation. So here we see 2 processes, the EMA marketing authorization and the JCA. You can see they are conducted in parallel, and the JCA process will be initiated after the EMA procedure starts. The JCA process ends with the release of the final report and its summary at the latest 30 days after EC approval. So following the definition of the assessment scope at about day 120, the company will have 100 days to develop and submit the JCA dossier, and even less in the case of accelerated procedure, 60 days. So this will be unmanageable unless you have well anticipated and prepared for the JCA months before the marketing authorization application. And to allow for sufficient preparation, the development of the JCA dossier should be started at the time of initiating the marketing authorization application. Okay.
Yeah, and actually comes back the regulatory aspects. It is essential, in fact, to conduct a market access landscape assessment to anticipate these PICOs requested by member states, because in reality, the PICOs will be defined based on a claimed therapeutic indication of the product at time of submission of the marketing authorization application. And you recall that there are moments whereby there will be clock stops and so forth, but in reality, the dice are already thrown, and fundamentally what is needed, and it's also identified by the HTA regulation, that during the evaluation of your dossier for marketing authorization, that the indication may change for different reasons, for subgroup populations, identification of better response that satisfies the minimum requirements for marketing authorization in terms of efficacy and safety characteristics. So you definitely need to anticipate and balance the best claimed therapeutic indication at time of preparation of your marketing authorization application, since there's a constant dialogue during the EMA and the JCA during the evaluation. So definitely anticipate and balance the therapeutic indication, which is the beacon of your dossier. And eventually also you need to anticipate the PICOs to be requested for the JCA dossier aspects. So Gabrielle, I also leave you the floor on how to best anticipate these PICOs.
Yes, so you can do that analyzing European national clinical guidelines and consensus, HTA resolutions and HTA recommendation, identifying availability and reimbursement conditions and comparators product available in each member state, and working with KOL and patient organization to gain their insights. Okay, so let's conclude. So the JCA process and the marketing authorization procedure will be conducted in parallel, which is something new with respect to timing. As previously, the HTA reimbursement process happened sequentially with first marketing authorization and then HTA reimbursement submissions. Companies will continue to focus on their European major markets, usually the big five, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, unless the targeted population is living elsewhere, which is often the case for orphan disease with unequal prevalence across Europe. However, companies will be obliged to answer all PICOs at European level. So before the JCA, companies were anticipating their main markets only, leaving the other affiliates dealing with local specific expectations. This said, if all PICOs must be answered, companies tend tactically decide to spend more time and effort on those relevant to their main markets. But keep in mind that the JCA is an assessment, it's not an appraisal, and that at national level, the reimbursement decision is made by the Ministry of Health, and the HTA appraisal enlightened this decision. So member states, they are expected to use the JCA report to appraise their health technology. As per the HTA regulation, they are required to give the JCA report due consideration, but it will not be mandatory. While national HTA bodies will have the option to complement the joint report, they should not duplicate the assessment that has already been collectively evaluated. So this approach aims to ensure efficiency and prevent unnecessary redundancy in the assessment process across different HTA bodies. Next slide. Okay, in Europe, we could consider that we have three HTA archetypes. Some member states lack HTA expertise. They do not have real HTA process, or they may have an immature HTA system. Here, there might be some delay before they really leverage the JCA report for their reimbursement decision. In other countries, such as Germany or France, we can expect lighter dossiers because these countries focus on clinical evidence for their decision. But in other countries, such as Sweden, Ireland, where the appraisal is based on cost-effectiveness analysis, the economic evidence is out of the joint clinical assessment scope. So here, the JCA cannot fully replace the national assessments, even if PICO-based indirect comparison and network meta-analysis are the basis of the evidence in the cost-effectiveness model building. Next slide. So medium-sized and big pharma with an affiliate in each member state, or almost can easily anticipate PICOs in advance thanks to the affiliates' involvement. And by the way, the affiliates' role will drastically evolve because they will all become much more involved in pre-launch phase. But for ex-Europe biotechs looking for a European commercial partner or willing to become acquired, the picture is very different. These companies must prepare for the GCA until the partner takes over. Without early preparation, the potential partner may postpone the marketing authorization application because developing a JCA dossier within 100 days or 60 days is just unmanageable. And a delayed marketing authorization application would decrease the asset value, especially in oncology, which is a very competitive field. So these companies have to rely on consultancies combining clinical, regulatory, and market access expertise. Decebal.
I'm muting myself. I'm unmute, yes. So an additional conclusion here is related to connecting all that we have disclosed and shared with you, which is known but still has to be put in practice, is the impact of the JCA on an evidence development plan. This is an essential point for all developers who tend to want to reach the market with innovative products. What we can see here is that the JCA regulation has an upstream effect and confirms an upstream effect for the need of medical, economic, and patient engagement considerations to be included and assessed in a general development plan for your innovative health technologies. As a matter of fact, this global development plan includes aspects such as significant benefit concepts, indirect treatment comparisons, that is to say, you must ensure that the endpoints will enable such indirect treatment comparisons to happen, such as factorization and assessment of the best standard of care, with or without the existing treatment comparators on a country-by-country basis, which may differ from the countries that you've selected for the clinical trial conduct and the pivotal evidence of the data sets. But you also need to stratify per indication subsets that you could be targeting or are pushed to consider at time of your marketing authorization application process happens. These PICOs, they do impact and are also impacted by the proposed indication and the subgroups that you have actually tested your product into pivotal trials. You also need to ensure that this indication that you propose well reflects the pivotal trial population and its outcomes. And also do not forget patient engagement, because at the end, we need to ensure that the endpoints are also relevant from the patient and relatives perspective during the daily use of your product and innovative product. Everything that we've said here, in fact, is the crystallization of a long-lasting process that has already started a long time ago. Let's say EMA is open and has always been opened towards active comparators from the ethics standpoint, for medical reasons, also science-based driven considerations. So scientifically, EMA has always been open towards active comparators when it makes sense. At the same time, during the past years, EMA and HTA bodies do and have collaborated, have initiated collaborations such as joint assessment in scientific advices. So EMA is also very much more open to accept study design that meet the payer's expectations, therefore allowing the marketing authorization holders, the ones that who want to submit, to negotiate during the development and are in fact confirmed at time of marketing authorization. And this JCA is an opportunity for clarifying and finalizing the long-lasting relationship during the dossier preparation and development plan of your product. Having said that, we thank you very much for your attendance, and I guess we're gonna be happy to take questions. I'll leave the floor then to Zenji probably.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel and Gabriel, sharing your insights. I do hope for those who answered our, I think it was the second poll question, you are in the middle of preparing your MA in Europe, or you plan to do it in the next few months. You really need to take into consideration this new process into considerations. Before we address the questions we received during live sessions, I would like to ask a final question to the audience. If you would like to choose a partner to work with you on your dossier, what would be the most important, the 2 to 3 most important criteria when you're selecting the external service partner? The experience, expertise, pricing, the quality of the work, global presence, local expertise. I guess every criteria is important, but if you have to select 2 to 3, what will be the most important one? Share results. I share the results with the audience. Yes, experience, expertise, well, whether that partner has done something similar before. Of course, pricing is not something that we can overlook. And most importantly, I think the quality of the deliverables, because we want to make sure that the product dossier is successful. And the partner you choose will have the experience to handle all these type of things. All right, so thank you. Then let's see the questions we received during the session. The first question is, who are the authorities manage the JCA? Can you please explain or confirm? I mean, who will appoint the national member state HTA bodies? I guess that's a question for you, Gabrielle.
I think it's for me. So it will be the HTA coordination group. But we don't know yet the procedure to appoint the assessor and the co-assessor for the JCA process. And your main contact point will be the HTA Secretariat, who helps the HTA coordination group, the assessor, and the co-assessors.
Okay, thank you. Isabel, anything to adding or comment?
No, I would say that definitely on this aspect, the coordination is also definitely taking into account information towards the EMAs as required. But fundamentally, that's the answer.
Okay. The next question is, what happens for additional indications to existing marketing authorization? That's a good question.
So I think it's for me again. There are 2 cases. Either your product has already a marketing authorization and you plan to launch an extension of indication. So here there will not be a JCA because it's only for new active substance. So next year, if you apply for a new active substance, which is a cancer product, for example, and you have to go through the JCA, then the next indications and the next extension will be also addressed with the JCA.
Thank you. The next question is about medical device. You mentioned that medical device will be taken into consideration at 2030. Could you please elaborate a little bit on that?
So medical devices are in the scope of JCA, not all. Normally, they are in scope from 2025, but we know by the HTA bodies that actually they would prefer to postpone to 2026. So indeed, officially it's 2025, but in practice it will be from 2026. And it's not all medical device, it's only invasive ones, so class 3 implantable, class 2B active device, and there for which there is a scientific opinion related to clinical evaluation for CE marking. And on top of that, there will be a selection by the HTA coordination group based on unmet medical need and the potential impact on healthcare systems.
Thank you, Gabrielle. The next question is the JCA supposed to cover all countries, even if the objective of the company is not to commercialize in all those countries?
Yeah, it will be, yeah, indeed. Yes, the JCA will is intended to help all member states, so the 27 countries of the European Union. And even if you target 2 countries only, you will be obliged to answer all PICOs. So we hope the process will evolve, especially with regards to the orphan drugs, where it would be very strange to address all countries if the prevalence is concentrated in one area. Yeah. So, but at the moment, yes, you will have to.
To probably complement what you just said, Gabrielle, what we need to be reminded of, and probably at the beginning of the presentation also helps out, we are speaking of the centralized procedure addressing 27 member states. So the JCA itself is applicable to the 27. No matter where you would want to further, let's say, launch your product, there are plenty of questions on how to best select and so forth. But that's probably something that needs to be borne in mind, that 27 member states are part of the whole parallel process that we've described. The choice with regards to the launch, that's probably more business / economic decisions. It's true that orphan drugs might be, let's say, with a pattern of launch is different from the full 27. That's also part of the discussions which are currently underway with the European pharma legislation revision.
Thank you for the adding, Isabel. And a question from Lucy: what preparations we should do before MAA submissions? I guess what she meant is what kind of preparations related to the JCA that they should anticipate before MAA submissions.
So the preparation is very much about the PICOs to be requested, because especially in oncology, if you end up with 20 PICOs, you have to know in advance you will deal with this and to organize in advance. It's a lot of work. One PICO means at least one systematic literature review and a feasibility assessment for indirect treatment comparison. And of course, even more work if the indirect treatment comparison is feasible. So yes, in advance, you must really identify which PICO will be requested and prepare for that.
And just to also complement what you just said, Gabrielle, and reminding a bit of the context of the marketing authorization with the specific claimed therapeutic indication, you definitely point to the right painful element, let's say, to imagine the different layers of considerations in terms of choosing the right or the best claimed therapeutic indication, not just from the pure perspective on a outreach on the market, but also in the PICO concept. Yes, you're right.
Thanks. Here comes a very specific question. How could we reconcile PICO requirements with an already finalized pivotal studies design? What aspect can be agreed ahead of time through JCA, I guess. He or she typed JSC, but I guess it means JCA.
The Joint Scientific Consultation.
Consultation, yeah.
Yeah. So can you repeat the question for me? The beginning, I missed something.
How could we reconcile PICO requirements with an already finalized pivotal study design, what aspects can be agreed ahead of time through JSC?
Yeah, so you may be eligible for a joint scientific consultation. So one condition is to be subject to joint clinical assessments, okay? But of course, if your clinical study design is finalized and you don't want to change, it's an issue unless the design is perfect. So the big benefit of the joint scientific consultation is that you can modify the planned trial design so that it fits with both regulators and payers' requirements or expectations. With regard to PICOs, indeed, if you have already subgroup in your clinical trial plan, it's important to have the number enough to after that be able to conduct good parallel, good indirect treatment comparisons. I hope I have answered the question, Richard.
Yeah. Okay, that's well. Nothing to add.
Not really. The difficult point is that having this kind of answer to this specific question, which is probably it's something that would be out of interest to be taken up in a specific interaction with the people or the persons who raise this question, because unless we can only give this kind of high level discussion and elements that has been highlighted by Gabrielle, it's difficult to be super specific on that aspect.
Yeah. That's why I suggest that we catch it offline. We need some information to provide you a more detailed answer. We can take one last question if you don't mind. I don't think we will be able to answer that question, but I will read it out anyway. Given the discussion with new pharma legislation, are you anticipating changes in this HTA regulation in the future?
Gabriel, before you think about it in terms of answer, they will just don't forget as well as any piece of legislation that is put in practice has there is an evaluation of its performance after a period of time. That doesn't mean that it will be removed or fundamentally modified, but there are regular assessments during the, let's say, the lifespan of the real life of this kind of a piece of legislation, especially this one being a super important and imposing one. There will be definitely interim evaluations of the performance of this legislation in terms of how much it is implementable in real practice and so forth. So on one side, I would say it is something that happens, and probably the reason for having this phasing from 25 to 2030 makes it a relevant one, because as much critical as we can see that cancer medicines and ATMPs are the first ones, you see that there is an opening and a widening towards more general concepts and diseases and drugs and technologies. So there's a need for starting at one point in time. On one side, addressing cancer is essential for a pan-European requirement and needs in terms of population and emotions and pricing and everything. ATMPs are also driving our innovative environment in Europe, so that's also another element for being tested, even though the potential for volumes in terms of outreach is limited. So I think that there will be revisions on the practical matters. I mean, as usual, it's like riding a bike. You don't ride a bike just overnight. There's a learning curve that has to happen.
Thank you, Isabel. So I guess that our webinar comes to the end. We would like to thank you, everyone who participated. And we will be happy to share the replay with you. And one last final message is per our experience, we would really highly recommend it all the developers to dialogue, partner with the regulatory agencies, HTA bodies, to work together towards the success of your product launch. Having the regulatory approval is not the end point, is make your products being accessible to the patient. That's the ultimate success. And we really encourage the developers to dialogue and interact with the HTA bodies, regulators, as early as possible, and get their opinions of your product development. Thank you, everyone, and we wish you a nice day, nice evening, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Bye-bye.